could make it, enjoyed, I hope. And we move in with his wife, that's correct. He married his wife. Yeah. Groom married the bride, and the husband married the wife. It was a special event with, 8 children singing the Im Eshkachech. I think that was the highlight of the evening. Baruch Hashem. And we go from simcha to simcha. We also had last night a simcha of another alumnus of ours, Josh. Josh. There we saw some other guys that have been in the Machon. I think this new crop doesn't know Akiva Ashkenazi. And,
I know him.
You know, okay, great. Yeah, he comes sometimes in the afternoons. Yeah, that's right. So some of those guys were there. And Ephraim from Australia. And I saw a lot of guys there. Ezra Maybaum. You guys probably don't know. You know Ezra? Yes, he was there. So we had a good little reunion and some dancing. I couldn't be at both chupot because they were pretty much at the same time. But we tried to dance at all the weddings, as they say. Okay, we're continuing to go through the important halachic aspects of the Seder night in order. We've gotten up to the Magid, and we talked about reclining, and we talked about the mitzvah of Hallel, and now on page 240, we have a section that talks about what we do with these 4 cups of wine. Usually when you make a bracha, I think we discussed it the other day, that if you make a shahakol at the beginning of the day and you continue to, if you don't leave the building, you don't leave the space, which is halachically defined as a space, then the bracha can continue. Your mind is on the shahakol and you continue to drink and drink, even if you refill the cup 100 times. Your mind was on the shahakol, all the drinks that you're going to drink and all the foods that you're going to eat that are under that bracha. But on the Seder night, so what do we do? I think you people have been at the Seder before. Do we say an additional bracha on the next cup of wine and the next cup of wine and the next cup of wine? On each one, right? So it's a little surprising because, we know that we're going to drink 4 cups of wine. This is mandated. So let's take a look, page 240, and discuss that in greater detail. And there's a few different customs, actually, about this. Okay, the second and the 4th cup. So Moshe, why don't you head us off and put away your phone? You don't need that. Yeah. Okay.
Number 21.
Yeah.
The laws of the 2nd and 4th cups. The only significant practical difference between communal customs regarding the laws of the Seder pertains to the bracha over the 2nd and 4th cups. Many Rishonim maintain that Berei Kriya Gofen must be recited over each of the 4 cups, even though our attention is not diverted from one cup to the next, because each cup is a mitzvah in its own right. This is the opinion of Rav Natronai Gaon, Rav Amran Gaon.
Stop there, by the way. If you walk 5 minutes to where my mother lives, in Kiryat Moshe, there are 2 streets. They're parallel streets. One is named Rav Natronai Gaon, and one is named Rav Amram Gaon. Right? Gaonim. What period are we talking about? Somebody help me out. It's an official title. He was the leader of the Jewish people during that period. Was called a Gaon. After the Talmudic era. Right after Talmudic era. Yeah, so 500 to 1,000. That's the, right. In between the Talmud and the Rishonim comes the Gaonim. Exactly. So these were primary Gaonim, and their opinion is you make a bracha over each cup. And the Rif, Rav Yitzhak Alfasi from Fez, Morocco, and the Rambam, who made his way to Egypt after some coming from Spain, running away with his father. Maharitz is an Ashkenazi posek, and the Ramah, of course, in Krakow, in Poland, in the 15th century. All of these opinions, all of these are in the category of, Rishonim, and except for the Gaonim, which we started with. And it is the practice, go ahead, Moshe, it is the practice of...
From Maharitz and Ramah, and it is the practice of Ashkenazim and of Yemeni Jews who follow Rambam. However, Rosh maintains that Hagofen must only be recited before the 1st and 3rd cups. The bracha over the 1st cup covers the 2nd cup because there is nothing between them to divert our attention. We recite a bracha over the third cup because it follows Birkat Hamazon, and a bracha is always recited over wine we drink after Birkat Hamazon, even if Hagofin was recited earlier in the meal, because Birkat Hamazon serves as a bracha achrona for the wine one drinks during the meal. The bracha over the third cup covers the fourth cup as well. Rav Yonah and Rashba also maintain that Hagofin is recited over the first and third cups only. Shulchan Aruch
Yes, excellent.
rules accordingly, and this is the Sephardic custom. There are also differing opinions among the Rishonim regarding the bracha achrona over the wine. In practice, however, there is a consensus not to recite a bracha achrona after each cup of wine. Rather, Birkat Hamazon covered the first two cups, and the bracha achrona al-Gefen recited after the fourth cup covers both the third and fourth cups.
So we mentioned a number of times that Rabbi Melamed takes it as one of his goals when writing his halachic series called Pninei Halacha. Recently, there's been some controversy about it, but we're all enjoying his clarity and his erudition. And in his series, one of his primary goals is to minimize or to perhaps to write a book of halacha which is for all traditions, Ashkenazim and Sephardim and Yemenites, and he will point out when there are differences, when there are significant differences. And this, he says, almost all the book is written for everybody the same. Of course, Kitniot is only an Ashkenazi custom. We spoke about the major difference. When it comes to the Seder night, the only major difference when it comes to the text that we recite, other than the tunes we sing, which might be different in the Eastern tunes versus the Western tunes. I don't think you'll get too many Broadway tunes from the Persian Jews, and you won't have all the different makamim that the Eastern Jews are singing. You won't find that when the Germans are singing their operatic type chazanut during the Hallel. So the tunes might be different, but in terms of actual practice of halacha, the only real difference on the Seder night is whether or not you make a bracha on the second cup, Bar Piragafen, on the second cup, and on the fourth cup. Ashkenazi custom is to say on all four cups of Bar Piragafen. Sephardic custom is only on the first and the third. Okay? Let's move on. The mitzvah to eat matzah and maror. Here we get to some calculations of how much you have to eat. And there's a few pages on that. We're going to try to cover this today before the end of the week. And eating the matzah and the maror, as we mentioned, that these are perhaps the most significant mitzvot of the night. The mitzvah of eating matzah is the only mitzvah d'oraita we have left. If we don't have a korban pesach and we don't have the maror, so because they go together, there are only d'rabanan. So the biblical mitzvah is to eat the matzah. Other than the major mitzvah of, what's the other major biblical mitzvah we still have today? To tell the story. Then in terms of and telling the story, we talked about, and we're going to read the Haggadah, which tells the story in so many different ways. It guides us. We have to get some guidance about how to fulfill this mitzvah to eat the matzah. And it might sound funny, how to eat. But we already talked about the posture, leaning. What else is there? Well, we didn't really talk about how much is considered to be enough matzah and how quickly you have to eat it. We sort of touched upon it here and there, but now Rav Melamed is going to address it directly. And whenever there's a mitzvah, any mitzvah, like in every legal code, but perhaps particularly in Judaism, we have really a lot of details, fine details about precisely how everything must be done. I remember once seeing a comic who made a routine about, can you imagine if it was a Jewish custom to put up a Christmas tree? You seen that? It says so many details. How high does the mistletoe have to be, and exactly what precise measurement, right?
Just like with the shins on tefillin, all the different nusachs will have slightly different designs of the star.
Yeah, that's right. You could have. There's a lot of detail when it comes to our practice, and that's beautiful. The truth is, some people who I've spoken to who converted to Judaism find particularly the attention to detail attractive, and they found at least that this general terms of speaking about how to be spiritual and how to be holy, and and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to live their life. They didn't have instruction. So perhaps it's an extreme, but what we have about every little detail being mandated and being regimented, it is quite extreme when you compare it to what appears in other religions or other fads or other types of practices, which is just love. Right? Yeah, you know who I'm referring to. Just love, and believe, and that's all it. That's it. It's good to be a good person, but there's no details, there's no guidance, there's no specific defined practice. Whereas we say Judaism is the religion of 613 mitzvot. Mitzvot are commandments. Most of the commandments are things we have to do, and so we have tremendous detail about precisely these actions that we're supposed to do. Of course, we can't forget that God wants our hearts, and the actions are supposed to help us express our beliefs and our values, but the actions are very, very important. And when it comes to the mitzvot of the night, the mitzvah of telling the story gets spelled out for us, literally spelled out for us in the Haggadah, which we recite, and we tell our children the story in a very specific way, which we spoke about. Now we're going to talk about the mitzvah of eating. Eating and drinking also gets very finely detailed and discussed. For thousands of years now, we've been discussing how to fulfill this mitzvah. I will say one more thing before we get into the nitty-gritty, that some people say that this is a feature of the galut, that the exile. Ultimately, Judaism, in its grand vision, is not really a religion. It's a civilization. It's a way of life. It's a constitution of a country. It's a grand plan for all of humanity. It's not just in the area of what we usually refer to as religion. Religion, you go to church, you go to shul, and you do specific religious rituals. The rest of the time, you're free. Judaism is an all-encompassing plan. It includes civil law, includes ritual law, but it also includes civil law. We have an entire legal system which covers not only religious issues. It's not only about marriages and how they should be done, but it's also about business deals and how they should be done. And it's also about war and how that should be done. That's a governmental issue. So really, Judaism is a very, very wide civilizational plan, and that's laid out for us. But when we went to Galut, we didn't have any more government. We didn't have any more an army. We didn't have any more an economy. We didn't have an independence to be able to even practice the legal system that we were given by our tradition, by our sages from the Torah. And so the focus got much, much more narrow. And the focus of our religious life became much more the family and the synagogue instead of all of life. And it's something to bemoan and to be sad about. But on the other hand, this is God's plan for the Jewish people, apparently. This is how it developed. And we were so much richer for it, because we maybe weren't focusing on all the details of how to run a government. We weren't focusing on all the details of how to run an army. We focused on what we had, what was practical. And that gave us even deeper insights and deeper analysis. And really we mined. When you're searching for gold, you can cover lots of expanse and find all the gold that's laying close to the surface. And if you have a very narrow area which you're mining, you mine deep. You mine deep, and you can pick up from the depths. You can pick up the best pearls that you wouldn't have found otherwise. So we have a tremendous amount of rich Torah discussions about the ritual eating, for example, what we're going to talk about now, the ritual eating of the Pesach night. We have a tremendous wealth of analysis. What actually constitutes a proper eating? There's, just on the surface, we can talk about eating. Also, there's the chewing, there's the swallowing, there's the digesting, There's the tasting. It's just so many elements. How do you define the halachic observance? Right? It says blow a shofar. You can analyze that as well. But every mitzvah that we do, and then we talk about the maror that has the bitter taste. Okay, how bitter? Which herbs do we use? It's not clearly defined in the Torah. We talked a little bit about what constitutes matzah, what's it grown from, what's it made from. But there's more details about the actual process of eating. When you eat, so if I just take a sip once, is that considered a drinking? Is that considered that I drank a cup? We spoke about it in the 4 cups. You have to drink a certain measurement. It has to be a significant drinking. And you can't draw it out over a long period of time. We had 2 opinions there, just to review. What were the 2 opinions about how long you have to drink your revi'it of wine, or your malo lugmav, your cheekful of wine? The Rambam said, as long as you have a few seconds, as long as it takes to drink that amount. It doesn't take very long to drink that amount. So you basically drink it in 1 swallow, 2 swallows, whatever it is. You just drink it all right away. The other opinion was, no, we follow the standard for eating a half a loaf of bread. Remember that? Shiur kadei achilat pras. Maybe you weren't here, David. You have to, and that we said there's debate. Is it 6 minutes? Is it 9 minutes? And so you have a longer time to finish your glass, or your a portion of the glass, that majority of the glass that we're aiming for. And we said there's a gradation of what's best and what's second best. So we did talk about it a little bit, this idea of measurements when it comes to the cups of wine. Now we're going to apply that same rigorous analysis to the mitzvot of eating. Mitzvot of eating, how fast you have to eat them, and how much of them you have to eat, what's considered to be kosher, maror, and so forth. So I am promoting, and I'm giving you perhaps a perspective where we can appreciate all these fine details. At the same time, I want to say that the other side of the coin is no less important. So we shouldn't, not see the forest for all the trees, right? The forest is the big picture that, we're eating the matzah to commemorate our redemption from Egypt, and we're eating the maror to commemorate the bitterness of our sages in Egypt, and it's part of our telling the story. And essentially, we're fulfilling a mitzvah. We're doing God's commandment when we do this. It's a ritual act of religious significance, and it's a very holy act. It's once a year. It's the only mitzvah of the year that we have of eating. And so those are sort of meta considerations that we have to keep in mind, at the same time that we keep in mind, am I doing it properly? Am I, swallowing properly? Am I doing it quick enough and enough measurements and so forth? So there's 2 sides of the coin. I give respect to both. The tendency, is some people say, is the main thing is that you eat the matzah and you think you love God, and you and then they take a little bite and they say, wow, it's great matzah, thank you, and move on. And they don't pay any attention to the details which have been mandated for us in the halachic system of thousands of years. On the other hand, you have people that are like sitting there on the edge of the seats and, okay, I have to lean, and I just stuff it in their mouth quick enough, because I have to do it quickly, and maybe I didn't have enough, and they have more, and then more, and they're so scared of the fulfilling all the details, that they miss out the thought of doing the mitzvah out of love, and doing it with joy, and to commemorate the exodus from Egypt. And some of it can be attributed to personality. There are different personalities. Story is told by Rabbi Baruch Levi Epstein, I believe, that he was the nephew of the Netziv, the famous Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. They were actually for about 10 years, for a long time, there was a debate who's going to be the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. After Reb Chaim Volozhin started the yeshiva, it's known as the founder of the entire concept of yeshiva. We're sitting here thanks to Reb Chaim Volozhin. So this was like the first modern type of yeshiva. Until that day, everybody would learn Torah in their hometown with the local rabbi. And that's why it was always a fight to get the best local rabbi, because the greater the scholar is, then the greater he'd be able to teach, the people of the town. And then so you had various towns all around Europe where they had rabbis and people would learn in them, but there's something to be gained by centralizing all the greatest minds and all the greatest students in one place. And this was the brainchild of Rabbi Chaim Volozhin. And he created this yeshiva in Volozhin. It's a town in Lithuania. And he created a dorm. At first, they didn't have dorms. But people would just eat, stay at people's houses, and there was no dining hall at first. They just, sort of ate for the people of the town of Volozhin would host a yeshiva boy for a week, for 2 weeks, and this was their donation to the yeshiva. In any case, it developed into a centralized, worldwide yeshiva. Really, the greatest scholars, the greatest students came. Famously, Rav Kook was a student there in the yeshiva of Volozhin. In any case, Rav Chaim Volozhin was the founder. After him, his son took over, Rabbi Yitzhak Volozhin, and then afterwards there was a machloket. Who gets to take over the leadership of the yeshiva? There was 2 camps. One camp followed Rav Chaim Mibrisk, the famous Rav Chaim of his the Talmudic analysis, perhaps the revolutionary new style of Talmudic analysis which he innovated. And you might have heard the name Soloveitchik before, as continue this dynasty from Reb Chaim. He was actually continuing from his father. He was known as the Beit Halevi. It was his father who was in one faction, wanted him to be the next Rosh Yeshiva, and there was another faction who wanted the Nitziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who actually it was because it was such a central institution in the Jewish world. When and they were not solving it in the yeshiva, they actually brought in the greatest rabbis of Europe to solve this problem. They came in, they heard both factions, they spoke to the students, they spoke to the faculty, then they made their decision. And their decision was, as we know, the Netziv is the one who gets the nod. And he became the Rosh Yeshiva. Ultimately, it was short-lived. He was the one who led the yeshiva until its closing. And he decided to close it. We can't go on and tell stories for the whole morning. But why am I telling this story? Because his nephew was younger than him, but he was very big scholar. He wrote books himself. We're not going to tell that story. He actually went on to become a banker. Amazing Torah scholar, but also he worked. And he tells the story that he once spent Pesach in Volozhin, and he was invited to the 2 Rosh Yeshiva's homes for the 2 Sedarim, right? Of course, in Chutz La'aretz, there are 2 days of Pesach, of the first day, the first festival of Pesach. And so you have 2 Seders. And one Seder he describes by the Beis HaLevi, by the leader, the founder of this royalty of the Lithuanian world, of the stream of geniuses and Talmudic scholars, and they were more on the side. He says we focused very much on the details of the halacha, and everything was timed in terms of the eating. How long do we have? And then they were very careful to finish. We're going to talk about that. That there's some the ideal is that you finish the afikoman, which is later on. It's after the meal. You should finish that before midnight, the halachic midnight called chatzot. And they were very careful about that. We have to, so the meal was very limited because they had to finish on time. And they said all the words of the Haggadah with precise detail and trepidation. And that was one experience, which was beautiful. But the next night, he went to the Netziv Seder, and he describes how the Netziv was sitting there like a king in royalty, wearing his white garment and totally at ease and enjoying himself with his children and grandchildren and telling the story and regaling everybody with accounts and the lavish meal that was served, and none of the nervousness, none of the of course they fulfilled all the mitzvahs properly. Maybe, I don't know what they did about the chatzot. Did they actually make it by midnight? The halacha is interesting that it's actually defined that way, that ideally it should be till midnight, but if it's afterwards, it's still okay. And there's discussions about what to do if it's too late. But he describes in great detail these 2 great leaders, both of them, his Rosh Yeshiva, and they had very different seders. their Seder table, their festival celebrations looked very differently. And he attributed that, of course, to personality. And it's true. There's a lot of personality which is involved. When you take the Torah, we're learning the basics, we're learning the laws, the fundamentals. We have to each apply them in our own home. And I think we're going to express our personalities when we do that. And myself, I think you've been with me long enough, and I say it so often that I appreciate both sides of the coin. I always try to take the best of all. I've had many teachers from the Soloveitchik stream and from the other streams of Judaism. We won't get into the details right now. And I try to blend and take the best from both. And I guess I come out somewhere a little bit of both. So that's my suggestion. That's my guidance to you, is that the best, the goal that we're looking for is to have a balanced approach to Judaism. Of course, appreciate the meaning and Rahmana Liba by God requires our hearts, and emphasize the joy, emphasize the education of the children, see the bigger picture, but of course not to deny and not to be lax in any way, to cross all your T's and dot all your I's and make sure that every little halachic requirement is performed. And it's a juggling act sometimes. Sometimes it's hard to find the precise balance, and you'll have, some days like this and some days like that. You'll have some years where your Seder will look a little bit like this, and some years it'll look a little different. It may depend on the guests that you have. It may depend on how you're feeling that year, and so your style in religious life is something for you to find. And I don't think you have to define it. You sort of just live it. That's the goal, to live it to its fullest. Okay, now we're going to go back to Rabbi Melamed and read inside the book. Page 242. Russell, good morning. I'm glad that you made it in. And Michael, good morning. Thomas, why don't you read for us page 242, that's number 22 in chapter 16 of the laws of Pesach.
The mitzvah to eat matzah and maror. There is a Torah commandment to eat matzah on the night of the 15th of Nisan. As it states, in the evening you shall eat matzot. This matzah must have been guarded, shmura, as it states, and you shall observe, ushmatem lematzot. And some poskim say it must be made by hand, with a specific intention to fulfilling this mitzvah. One who eats stolen matzah does not fulfill his obligation. Therefore, it is good to pay for the matzah for Pesach, or at least obtain the explicit consent of the store owner to grant the buyer ownership of the matzah, even if it has not yet been paid for it. Because if the store owner does not agree to give the matzah on credit, one cannot fulfill his obligation with it. As soon as one eats Takedzait or Shmura matzah, he has fulfilled the Torah commandment, because all eating related to commandments in the Torah require the consumption of at least Takedzait. Beyond the Torah obligation, the sage ordained read more Kerizaitim, how matzah to be eaten at the Seder, making a total of 4. After reciting the Berachot of Hamotzi and Achilat Matzah, we heat Lechatchila 2 Kerizaitim, one from the soft matzah for Hamotzi, and one from the broken matzah for Achilat Matzah. Later we eat another Kerizait with maror for Korah, and at the end of the meal we eat one more Kerizait as the Afikomen. Some say it's preferable to eat 2 Kerizaitim for Afikomen. Before getting into the specifics of the size of Kerizait, let us clarify the practical halacha. There is a consensus that Kerizait is about a third of a piece of machine-made matzah, and about the same size with a piece of a handmade matzah. That's right, after reciting Hamotzi and Achilat Matzah, 2/3 of a machine matzah must be eaten. Another third should be eaten for Korah, and one more for the Afikomen. For those who are stringent about the heating of 2 Kerizaitim for Afikomen, one of them must suffice for this purpose. The Kerizait of matzah must be heaten continuously. If one pauses while heating, and as a result takes longer than a shur achilat kwas to eat a Kerizait, it does not fulfill the mitzvah. We shall soon discuss exactly how much time a shur achilat kwas is. But for now, it's enough to say that whoever eats a Kerizait of matzah continuously fulfills the mitzvah without questions, and need not to look at the clock, because the only way it is possible to take longer than a half prase is if one stops eating for a few minutes.
Okay, so I think I mentioned the other day when we were talking about drinking the cup of wine, I said, pay attention. Drinking the cup of wine is a mitzvah, so don't stop in the middle and do other things and talk to people. First, fulfill your mitzvah, and then you go on to the next thing. Same thing he's saying with matzah. Matzah, the eating of the matzah is, I actually sometimes suggest, most people usually do what I suggest, not always. I suggest that we eat the matzah in silence. We talked a lot for an hour or more, telling the story. Everybody got a chance to talk. Now, everybody shut up. And use your mouth, not for things that come out of it, but for things that go in it. The mitzvah is to eat. So eat the matzah, appreciate the matzah, think. You don't have to be talking. And that way, if you just eat the matzah, for sure you'll eat a kazait within the requisite time. I'll just recap. We give a measurement of how much matzah to eat in the measurement of olives, kezayit, and the plural of that, kezeitim, which means how many measures of an olive do you have to eat? The standard is, he says, for the first, right after we recite the bracha, we say 2 brachot. One, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, it's our bread. And the other one, for al achilat mitzvah, about the mitzvah of eating matzah. And that's why the custom is that you should have 2 kezeitim, 2 measurements of an olive of matzah. One for the meal, that's the hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and one for the mitzvah of eating the matzah. If you have trouble eating matzah, we'll talk about it, that you can perhaps get away with only one. But if you eat 1 matzah, then you fulfill the Torah obligation. But the instruction is to try to eat 2 olives measures for the matzah. And then later on, there's the afikoman. At the end of the meal, we eat another measure of matzah. How much? It's a debate why we do that. Most interpretations explain that that's a commemoration of the Korban Pesach, which was eaten at the end of the meal, after you're already satisfied. Some people say there's a mitzvah in the Torah. I suggest you look it up in the Sefer HaChinuch afterwards. It's over here, Sefer HaChinuch, mitzvah number 19. Do not break a bone. He says if you're hungry, you might break a bone. And we're supposed to be like rich people and free men. We don't want to break any bones. You're not allowed to break bones in the Pesach sacrifice. And so if you're hungry and you're eating because you're starving, you might break a bone. So if you eat it at the end of the meal, then you'll eat the meat and you'll leave the rest, and you're already satiated, and then you have the korban for the mitzvah of eating the korban. So we don't have the Pesach anymore. How do we commemorate it? By eating matzah. So the matzah is a commemoration of the korban Pesach. But wait, the korban Pesach was brought together, was eaten, even in the day when there was a korban Pesach. The meat was eaten with matzah. The Torah says you have to eat matzah together. So we have to commemorate the matzah that we ate with the korban. So we ate 2 kazaitim of matzah. One matzah is commemorating the meat, and one is commemorating the matzah. And some people say that's the explanation why the custom is to have 2 kazaitim at the end as well, the final eating of the matzah. Some people say it's just because it's such a precious mitzvah. It's just so precious. It's like, this is it. You're finishing your mitzvah observance of eating for the entire year. This is the only mitzvah of eating. And so instead of finishing off with 1 kazait, we finish off with 2 kazaitim. Just so it should be significant to show we cherish it. There's different interpretations. And we're going to see that you're not allowed to eat anything else after having that final afikoman, that final matzah. You don't have dessert afterwards. You have dessert first. If you're going to have candies, if you're going to have sweets, if you're going to have chocolate, whatever it is, you do that after the meal, like some people do. After every fancy meal, they have dessert, and only after dessert do you have the afikoman. The afikoman, because the Talmud says you should leave the taste of the matzah, the taste of the mitzvah, should be retained in your mouth. And if you have another food afterwards, it's going to cancel out the taste of the matzah. So you're allowed to drink water. We'll talk about it in detail. He says tea and coffee are fine, but not any other food are you allowed to. So even if you stay up all night to learn Torah, to continue to tell about the story of the Exodus, You shouldn't be eating anything after that final afikom. So we've 2 kazaitim at the beginning. Ideally, 2 kazaitim at the end, even though you might be full. Really hard to get down that last extra kazait. I'm speaking from experience. And then in the middle, there's one more kazait for what? No, we said that's part of the 2 kazaitim at the beginning. That's part of the 2 kazaitim at the beginning. That's why we have 2 zaitim at the beginning, 2 at the end. We just explained. What's the one more? The korech, exactly. The custom of eating the matzah together with the maror. That first we do each separately, the matzah separately, then the maror separately, then we do them both together. So that's one more kazait. There you don't have to do 2. Don't go crazy. Only 1 kazait is enough. Okay, now he also gave a measurement here. We're going to see how he got to it, but he tries to keep things simple, and he says the simple way to measure a kazait, in his opinion, is 1/3 of a pizza of matzah. Other people say, actually, the measurement of a zayit, when you translate it through all the calculations, comes out to be a full matzah. So you can see that if you're trying to eat 2 kazaitim at the beginning of the meal, 2 kazaitim at the end of the meal, and 2 kazait and a kazait for korech, that would mean, according to the Machon Meir opinion, you'd have to have 5 whole matzahs at the Seder night.
The
Square ones, yeah. Yeah, and it's approximately the same with the hand ones as well. I agree. 5, much more than 5 olives, right? 5 olives can get into one little bowl, but you take 5 matzahs and crumble it up, it's going to be much, much larger. So there's something strange about these calculations. But, there are many people who are machmir on this. As I said, it's a biblical mitzvah. You try to do it in the best way possible. But it makes a lot of sense to summarize, as he did, to go with the more minimal shear and say 1/3 of a matzah is a kazait. So to eat 2 kazaitim, 2/3 of a matzah. 2/3 of the matzah at the beginning, 2/3 of the matzah at the end, and 1 additional third for the korech in the middle. You've got a great sandwich of lots of matzah. Okay, it still adds up to be quite a bit of matzah. And but we're going to talk about this calculations right now. Okay. So questions first.
No, exactly the question. How much, like the square one? How much it's kazait? What's this?
So in usual, Thomas, what's the usual halacha? We paskin that a kazait we measure
28 and 30 grams.
28 grams, right? 27 grams. So there's a whole book. There's a book here with lots of pictures. It's called the Kazait book. And it has a picture of a wafer and a picture of a donut and a picture of a loaf of bread, and of each food item it tells you how much, so that you can estimate in your mind all year round. We need to know, have you eaten a kazait? Why? Bracha achrona you only make if you had that measurement. Don't confuse that with bracha rishona. Bracha rishona, even if you have 1 bite, you have to make a bracha beforehand. But the bracha afterwards, it's only after a significant eating of 1 olive's worth, and that's what the standard is, 28 grams. When that comes out in matzah, we're going to see how he translates that in just a second. Yes?
So when we're measuring if something is a kazait, do we do it by volume or by weight?
It's also a very good question, which he's going to relate to. It seems clear that the answer to that is that it should be by volume. However, it's a lot harder to measure by volume when it comes to solids, and therefore many people do use weight. They translate it into grams instead of milliliters, which is volume, right? So we're going to see those details just now. Some of it, he has 1 or 2 pages. I have a 300-page book I could send you. It's in Hebrew, but it has there's a lot of discussion about how to calculate the size of the olives. And let's see what he has to say, and then I'll see if I want to add something. I'll add something. Page 243. I'm going to ask Renan one more question before we start.
If I do the bracha,
Yes.
And I eat the matzah.
Don't forget to lean.
Don't forget to lean. If I eat the matzah and I lean, if I eat a kazait without go crazy,
yes,
I fulfill the mitzvah.
Yes, the mitzvah d'oraita, correct? Yes, okay. Absolutely. That's what he just said. Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the end of paragraph 1 on page 242, that's what he said. As soon as one gets a kazait of Shmura Matzah, he has fulfilled the Torah commandment. Okay? Yes, Amos.
My question is, you mentioned last time that we should, when we break the matzah and we cover the command, that it should be the bigger part.
That's right.
And then now we're talking about the two kazait, and then you say it's best to eat all the commandments together, but if we can't left anything of command, if someone if we can have a leftover of afikoman, that's one question. And the other question is, because we already eat we should do, as I understand, we should eat all of that. Then why are we talking now about two kazais about it?
Okay, so it's a good question. We talked about the Seder plate. Now we have the central Seder plate, which has all the mitzvah items of the night, the maror and the karpas and the muzro and the beitza, the commemorative items as well. And then we have the 3 matzot. So usually there's only, if there's one leader of the Seder, he has the matzah in front of them. Sometimes there's enough matzah and everybody has their own 3 matzahs, which is very unique. Only on the Seder do we have 3. Usually the rest of the year, so two breads, right, for Shabbat. So anyways, this night we have 3 matzot. And then there's specific rituals, as we spoke about, breaking the middle matzah and leaving some over for the afikoman. Now, if you're not having Seder all by yourself, then it's going to be really hard for everybody to have a kazait of the matzah from those matzot. Those matzahs, there's only 3 of them. And what did he say? We have to get 5 zaitim out of them, and if each zait is at least a third, if not more, of a matzah, there's just not enough in there for those 5 kazaitim. And therefore, what we do is we have additional matzot, other than the 3, and we supplement. So there's a pile of matzot, you bring them out when you're about to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, and then everybody should get a little bit from the central matzah, and then supplement with the other matzot. Ideally, we should have shmura matzah for the night of the Seder, for all the mitzvot, so you can buy additional shmura matzah that you have. I just ordered last night, by the way. Last night, nowadays, you can do everything online. And I saw there's a new matzah bakery that run by people who I know, and so I ordered their matzah last night. And it's expensive. Oh. But all right, that's when you think of it, that all it is flour and water. Not buying complicated electronic panels here. It's bread. It's bread. It's very thin bread. Yeah, that's it.
Water and supervision.
It's a lot of supervision. It's a lot of care from the moment of harvesting of the wheat. It has to be guarded, and there's halachic issues, and there's the oven, and then there's the labor, and then there's the packaging, and you want to make sure. The love, that's right. They put the love in there, and the bottom line is it's a mitzvah, and I'm convincing myself that I'm happy to be spending so much money on a mitzvah, and it happens only once a year, so that's okay. Hopefully, it won't break the bank, as they say. But let's proceed. How do we calculate? So, who's going to read for us? Yossi. You're on. 243, please. Section 23.
Calculating the size of a kazait for Torah commandments. The long exile gave rise to uncertainty regarding the size of a kazait. According to Rambam, a kazait is slightly less than a third of the volume of an egg. According to Tosfos, it is about the volume of half an egg. In practice, due to this uncertainty, the custom is to follow the stricter ruling of Tosfos. The equivalent of half an egg was calculated as being a third of a piece of machine matzah, and as a similar sized piece of hard handmade matzah, whose thickness is similar to that of a machine matzah.
It's very hard to say, because there's many different machines, different companies that produce the matzah at a different thickness, and then of course the hand matzah, some people are going to roll it out thinner, some going to roll it out thicker, and so it's really hard to say how much of a matzah. We're trying to define something imprecisely. But just to say, I will add one more thing, that it stands to reason that the Balei HaTosfot, who said that an olive is the size of half an egg, stands to reason that they never saw an olive in their life. They were trying to calculate how much an olive is, because in Europe they don't grow olive trees in most places. It's a Middle Eastern. You've seen olive trees in Europe?
Like southern Europe, they have
Italy.
Italy, yes, that's closer to the land of Israel. But anything north, we're talking Germany and.
I never saw
and-
olive till I was 28.
You never saw an olive. Wow, amazing. From in the Czech Republic, they, even now in the day of import and export, of course. But right in those days, it was just not a local product, and so they came to their conclusions based on comparing the different sources and the different explanations, and the Rambam, who lived in Spain and then made his way through the land of Israel to Egypt, he knew what an olive was, and so when he says a little bit less than a third of an egg, that stands to reason. Of course, there's different size eggs and there's different size olives. We'll get into that a little bit. In any case, halachic tradition developed very much in Europe based on the words of the Tosafists, and their calculation of half an egg is written in all the codes. Of course, the Rambam. So the Yemenites are going to follow the Rambam, but the rest of the Jewish people. Have other opinions to consider, and so the standard that we're machmir for now is a third of a piece of a machine matzah, and but when push comes to shove, and I can show you in this 300-page book in Hebrew. I'll send it to the PDF. I'll send the PDF to you. There's pictures in there, so even if you don't read Hebrew, you can see the pictures. When push comes to shove, most poskim, the greatest authorities, as we spoke about when it comes to the size of the Kiddush cup, that the Kiddush cup can be much smaller than the average one you get sold now in the Judaica stores. The size of your palm is pretty much all you need to qualify as the size of an olive, of a palm, this size of matzah. Not a third of a matzah, but even smaller than a third of a matzah. Probably has the same volume as an olive, and that's not 28 grams, the way it's usually calculated, but it's more like 17 grams. Wow. And in some olives, it's even 5 to 6 grams. So it's a much smaller shiur, which when you're not able to do anything better, it's probably good enough. But of course, we don't do the minimum. We definitely try to have at least the 15, 16 grams, and ideally the 28 grams, which is the standard tradition. How we calculate it. Just like we said, we're machmir about the size of the cup. We must machmir about the. So you really can't weigh on Yom Tov. If you're gonna want to do your own measurements, you do it before Yom Tov. Beforehand is best, but you don't have to, because they did it for you. And now he's telling you, half an egg is approximately a third of a matzah. You want to be sure, so eat a half a matzah. So half a matzah times 2 is 1 whole matzah. Make the brachot, eat 1 whole matzah. You're covered according to, more than enough, according to the Tosfot's opinion. Anyways, let's continue. And we mentioned when we came to the Chazon Ish shiur, remember we were talking about the Chazon Ish and his larger shiur of wine, how much you had to drink wine. So he also has larger shiurim when it comes to solids as well. And therefore, almost double. It was 86, right? We said the gematria of kos is 86 milliliters. When it comes to a revi'it, the size of a revi'it, we said the Chazon Ish is approximately 150 milliliters. Right. According to that calculation, things changed, the eggs got smaller, I don't know, whatever reasoning he gives. Chazon Ish was such a powerful authority that, and many people followed his guidance, they still do, especially when it comes to a Torah law. So maybe you should have almost double the amount of that half an egg. So essentially you're looking for a whole egg. So that's why I said you get to the size of almost a whole matzah for 1 kazayit. Okay, so let's see it inside. Who's reading for us? Yossi, you're doing a great job.
This is the consensus of all Sephardic and most Ashkenazi authorities. However, one of the most prominent Ashkenazi Acharonim, Rabbi Cheskel Landau, also known as Nadabi Yehuda, reached the conclusion, based on his own calculations, that our eggs are half the volume of the eggs that existed at the time of the sages. It follows that a kazayit is not half the size of one of our eggs, but is the size of a whole contemporary egg. Rav Abraham Yeshaya Karlitz, the Chazanish, concurred with Nadabi Yehuda's calculations. Thus, in order to fulfill the Torah commandment using the Chazanish shiur, one must eat an egg's bulk of matzah. Although the halacha usually follows the standard shiur and does not take Chazan Ish's shiur into consideration when it comes to the Torah commandment of eating matzah, it is proper l'chatchila to satisfy all opinions. Ideally, then one should eat a Chazan Ish kazayit of matzah, or appropriately 2/3 of a matzah.
Approximately. So each kazayit is not a full matzah, but 2/3 of a matzah. So 2/3 times 2 is
1/3.
1 and a third, right? And 1 1/3 matzah to fill the Chazon Ish shita. This, however, is not really. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Keep reading this.
Yossi, go ahead. Yeah, this, however,
Yeah.
This, however, is not really much of a stringency, since anyway our custom is to eat 2 kazayitim initially, one for hamotzi and another for chilat matzah. Since these 2 kazayitim contain a single chazan ish kazayit, we fulfill the Torah commandment according to all opinions.
but because you're going to eat 2/3 anyways, right? 1/3 for the first kazayit, second third for the second kazayit. So you don't have to fulfill the Chazon Ish times 2. That's too much of a chumrah. Everybody agrees that if you eat 1 zayit, it's good enough. That's what Renan's question was. So we eat 2 kazaitim. So if we're eating 2 kazaitim of the regular shear, we make up 1 kazait of the Chazon Ish's shear. So everybody can be machmir pretty easily on that. And basically, the bottom line is, therefore, you should eat 2/3 of a matzah after al achilas matzah.
They don't sell like the special for the night of the Seder. Like,
They do.
Measurement of kazait.
You can actually buy charts in the Judaic stores, and they actually have people, laminated posters of, picture of a half a matzah, 1/3 of a matzah, 2/3 of the matzah. They actually give you, they have like this page, and you put your matzah on the page, and they see, yeah.
I think I even saw once
Yeah?
Machon Meir that was like marked like in three different parts. Like I
Really?
believe now.
I don't know if that's, it really could be. I don't know. I've never seen.
Matzah is made which are to the measurement of the design.
Really?
Mm.
I've never seen that.
That makes so
It's
much
interesting.
more sense.
Right. Make those matzah the size of a kazai. Very interesting. But according to who? Okay, let's keep reading. One who finds it difficult, next page. One who finds it difficult to eat 2/3 of a piece of matzah, machine matzah, can eat 1/3, because according to the standard calculation, 1/3 of a matzah contains a kazai. One even recites al-achil matzah blessing before eating this amount. For the standard measure is so well founded that it is not considered the sort of uncertainty that causes the bracha to be cancelled. So really, we're saying that 1/3 of a matzah is the proper zayit, and we're being machmir if possible. The Sephardic custom, who can read for us the Sephardic custom? Russell, you're so far away, but you're hiding there in the back. But that's it. Read for us, page 245.
Yes. The Sephardic custom regarding a kazayit. Sephardic Jews customarily do not give any consideration to the Nadab, Yehuda, Chazon Ish position, because their own tradition about these measurements was handed down in an orderly manner from generation to generation without change. Even with regard to Torah commandments, they are not concerned about the Chazon Ish shiur. It follows that the volume of a kazayit does not exceed 1/3 of a piece of machine matzah, based on the position of the support that a kazayit is about half an egg. The above applies when one measures according to volume. However, most Sephardim actually have a custom to base the shiur on the shear on weight, as it is difficult to calculate the volume of each food independently to determine whether one must recite a bracha achrona after eating it. After all, foods come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, long and thin, round and square, etc. Some foods contain hollow spaces that are not factored into the volume. Thus, in order to make it easier to calculate shiurim, the practice of measuring by water weight was adopted. It was thus determined that a kazait, or half an egg, is equal to 29 grams. A more recent adjustment puts it at 25 grams. In order to eat this amount of matzah, one must eat nearly a whole piece of machine matzah. In other words, if we calculate a kazait of matzah by weight, it comes out almost 3 times more than if measured by volume.
Ouch.
This means that one must eat 4 machine matzot on the Seder night, 2 after the initial brachot, 1 for chorus, and 1 more for the afikomen. And for those who are stringent, 2 more for the afikomen. Yet it is clear that in principle, all measurements are by volume, not weight, as several leading Sephardic poskim, Rabbi Ben Zion Abishol and Rabbi Shalom Messas, have ruled. Since the stringency of measuring matzah by weight raises justifiable difficulties and consternation among many participants, we may instruct all Jews, Sephardic and Ashkenazi alike, that kazait is a third of a machine matzah.
Okay, this is Rav Melamed's opinion. As I said, he tries to have one halacha for all communities, and he thinks it's there are some Sephardic poskim who make it clear that this is a chumrah to measure by weight and not volume, and therefore he wants to standardize at 1/3 of machine matzah, and to be machmir for the Chazon Ish, the Ashkenazi, or machmir for the Chazon Ish, you have 2/3 of a matzah. But those who are of the Sephardic tradition and they want to keep up this tradition of going by weight, not volume, they're going to have a full matzah for each kazait of matzah. Yeah, a full matzah. It's something like that. Yeah, 29 actually. It's a challenge, right? But so it depends if you're healthy, if you could do it. If you can do it with joy, if you can do it, taking all of the other considerations into account. Everybody should follow their tradition. I don't know what more I can say. Okay, now it gets more complicated because you have to eat it quickly. You have to eat this quickly, the 2 full matzah quickly. How can you eat 2 full matzahs? It takes a while to get it down. So let's read a little more. Page 247, section 25. I'm going to ask David to read for us now.
How much is a shiur achilat pras? We have now seen that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah, as well as any other Torah commandment governing eating, one must eat at least a kazai. One condition must now be added. It is only considered a single act of eating if it is completed within the amount of time it takes to eat half of a loaf of bread, or a shiur achilat pras. If one eats half a kazait, waits 10 minutes, then eats another half kazait, it is if one eats half a kazait, it is
as if.
Wow, why can I spell?
As
It
if.
is as if he has only eaten half kazait, and hence he has not fulfilled the mitzvah. In the past, people would bake loaves of bread that would feed one person for a day, half a loaf a pras, at each of the 2 main meals. Once again, our long exile has caused disagreement among poskim over the precise size of a pras. According to Rambam, it is the volume of 3 eggs, and according to Rashi, 4 eggs. Several leading achronim tried to measure how long it takes to eat a pras, and many opinions have been offered. 9 minutes, Hatam Sofer, 7.5 minutes, Aruch Laner, 7 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, and 4 minutes, Rav Chaim Nae and Kav HaChaim. However, all these opinions relate only to Bediavad situation, because Le'atchila one should eat the matzah continuously, and whoever does so certainly fulfills his obligation. In addition, there is no need to look at the clock while eating the matzah, because any ordinary person who eats casually but without interruption would certainly finish eating in time. Even a slow eater, if he does not stop to do other things, will assuredly finish eating a kazait within a shiur achilat pras, because a pras is 8 or 9 times the size of a kazait, and it is inconceivable that one who eats a kazait without stopping will not finish in the time it takes to eat 8 or 9 times that amount.
Okay, so he tries to calm you down. Some people are looking at their watch, 4 minutes. You know, I have to finish. If you're Sephardi the custom, 2 full matzah in 4 minutes, it's a challenge. But if you're only trying to get 1/3 of a matzah in 9 minutes, it's much easier, right? So you take the more stringent of all opinions or the most lenient of all opinions. But the bottom line is I like his approach that if you eat normally and you focus, you make sure you're not doing other things. You don't stop in the middle to talk to your friends and discuss, where'd you buy your matzah this year? Oh, this is so tasty. Oh, last year is better than last year's. Last year's was fresh. Do all that talking afterwards, when you're finished eating your mitzvah eating of the matzah, and discuss it later. Yeah.
So, regarding eating, according to some of the more stringent opinions, you're eating like a large piece of matzah. Is it permissible to say have like a cup of water there with you while you're chewing it? Because sometimes it can take up the moisture out of your mouth and makes it difficult to swallow.
Sure, it's a good question. I wonder if he relates to that in the next section. It's not ideal because really you want to, this is the mitzvah eating. You want to be eating the matzah itself, especially if you're of the Hasidic bent and they're careful about never mixing water. Gebrocht, right? We talked about a shruya, the soaked matzah is forbidden, so they would never do that. It's bad enough you have saliva, but ideally you try without it. But I think it's once you make hamotzi, you can eat anything. There's no bracha issue, and if you have to drink some water to get it down your throat, it's better than nothing. But usually we try to do that without drinking, and drink it right afterwards. You can drink anything you want right afterwards. Rafi?
So the time is limited. Just imagine we have Sephardic old people, and they cannot eat so fast.
Yes.
And so they don't fulfill the
It's a challenge. It's a challenge. And the suggestion many times is to wet the matzah. If you're not going to be following that Hasidic custom of gebrocht, it's forbidden. Wet matzah is much easier to swallow, and you could crumble it up also, and add some water to it, and you'll be able to get down at least one kazait, which is really the minimum, right? Okay, let's finish it off with page 249. Renan. Number 26, page 249.
How the matzah is eaten.
The bottom line description. What Amos was asking about. How's this going to work actually? Go ahead.
Things are now washed with bracha, and the seder leader holds up the 3 matzot and recites the bracha of who brings forth bread from the earth. Chametz lechem min haaretz, the top and bottom matzot, while whole constitute lechem mishne. After this bracha, he put down the bottom matzot, so that it's left with the whole top matzah and the broken middle matzah, which represents lechem oni, lechem, the bread of poverty. And recites the bracha, who sanctifies us with his mitzvot and commandments concerning eating matzah. Asher b'sher b'mitzvotav mitzvano al achilat matzah. Then he takes a kazait from the upper whole matzah and a kazait from the middle matzah and eat them together. If there are many participants.
Amos, why don't you read this because you asked about it. Go ahead, Amos. If there are many participants.
If there are many participants, it makes sense to add more matzah to the bottom matzah, so that portion can be given to everybody. Once the seder leader has finished distribution from the middle matzah, he no longer needs to give the kazaitin to the mining participations only one. Only when one distributes portion from the middle matzah it's necessary to give a kazait from the broken matzah and kazait from the whole matzah. But when the broken matzah is finished, one gives only a kazait to each person. However, as we have seen, in order to satisfy the opinion that today's eggs are smaller than those of the sages' time, it is better to give each participant the equivalent of 2/3 of machine-made matzah. It makes no difference whether this is given from one matzah or from parts of two matzot. The seder leader should taste a little bit of the matzah before distributing portions in order to avoid an interruption between the bracha and the eating. After distributing matzah to everybody, he reclines and eat two kazatim with the intention of fulfilling the mitzvah. According to Sephardic custom, the seder leader dips the matzah in salt before distributing it to the participants, just as he does throughout the year. The custom of Ashkenazi Jew, on the other hand, is not dip the matzah in the salt because without salt it appears much more like a lechem oneh. Some people have a custom of giving to each participant 3 matzot, so that everyone can have a kazait from a whole matzah and a kazait of a broken matzah. In neither the leader nor the participants have to wait to receive matzah after the bracha. But the widespread custom is that the seder leader distributes matzah to everybody, and the fact that everyone eats together and that the seder leader recites bracha on everyone's behalf enhance the mitzvah. Others have custom to put out 3 matzot before the head of each household, who distributes portion to his family members. Even though each of these participants in fine, it is best for the head of each household to distribute matzah to his family members. The matzah is eaten while reclining. One should have in mind to fulfill the Torah commandments, remembering that it is eaten in commemoration of the matzot our forefathers ate when they left Egypt for freedom.
Excellent. Questions? We're good.
Why 3?
Because of lechem mishneh, we said. You have to have 2 whole breads when you make the bracha. If you only had 2, you'd have 1.5, because we break one of the matzot. So we have to have a third, so that not all the customs have 3. But the common custom is that you have 3 matzot on Seder night. And then that's why you hold all 3. So you have the top one that's just whole and the bottom one which is whole for the Birkat HaMotzi. The Motzi is going to be on 2 whole ones. And then the extra bracha, which is about the special mitzvah of eating matzah, we say it primarily on the broken matzah. So we drop off the bottom one. All you're left holding is the top and the broken matzah in the middle. And then you say the alachilat matzah. And then you take a kazait of each one that you're holding, kazait of the top one, kazait of the middle one, the broken one, and you recline and you eat it. And if you're able to distribute, from the one central. I have a debate this year, because my son-in-law is coming for the Seder, hopefully, and my son is coming for the Seder, both married. So they're a household. So am I only going to have one central 3 matzot, or are they each going to have their own matzot for their household? So, what do you say? What do you say?
Everybody for each household gets a set of 2.
Right. He says each of the practices are fine. It's best for the head of each household to, I'll give them each some 3 matzos.
Is that the household who is holding the evidence?
That's different opinions. But we'll stop here. I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom And it's not too early to say Pesach Kasher V'Sameach. Pesach Kasher V'Sameach. We'll continue next week. We're actually going to do much more exciting hands-on stuff, and we're going to look at the Haggadot themselves. Finish up here. We have about 20 more pages, and then we're be all ready for Pesach.